Video game adaptations, the final frontier for the film industry. You would think by now the code for creating a good video game adaptation would have been cracked. We've had very few hits and a lot of misses. Just spare them. Although sometimes the bad ones turn into so bad it's good cult classics that get loved because certain standout performances and memorable quotes.
The day bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
It seems like movies that are about video games receive higher praises from critics and audiences alike compared to movies based on video games. When it comes to explaining why video game movie adaptations don't seem to work, this sentence often gets used a lot. It's hard to turn an interactive media into a passive one. I've never bought into this because I would read tie-in books, comics, fanfic, and even watched a few TV shows that I thought were pretty good. I mean, yeah, it's hard, but it's not impossible, right? Now, when we look at the earlier games, and even a handful of modern games made for mobiles, they barely had a story. Any semblance of one was usually confined to the game's manual or opening cutscenes. The story was only there as an excuse for the gameplay to happen. As time went on, more importance was put into the storytelling, but back then it was, you must complete this task for reasons. But that doesn't mean that a very creative team can't build an interesting story from the smallest sliver of a plot, or even no plot. Digimon is a good example of that. The origins of Digimon were a Tamagotchi-style virtual pet game. No plot whatsoever. And look at what they made. There have been a lot more movies based on video games released in recent years, and some that are currently in production. Their source materials span a myriad of different genres, some that are story-heavy and some that are not, but all looking to break the curse of the failed video game movie. I feel for those who are tasked to do it. It can be tricky for filmmakers to find the right balance of staying true to the source material to appeal to fans of the game, yet offering something new and accessible to a whole new audience that is completely unfamiliar. Not to mention having to listen to corporate marketing executives who more than likely came up with the redesign of a classic character because changing everything about an iconic character loved by millions of people for decades somehow sounded like a good idea to them. Thus, wasting the time, money, and energy of the VFX artists who had to work long, grueling hours in a short time frame to fix it all, only for their studio to shut down days before the winter break, leaving 800 employees without jobs, and the end result is a mediocre movie.
That's no good.
I haven't played a good portion of the games these recent adaptations are based on, so I can't speak to how well they adapt their source material. Except for one game I have played a lot. Let's talk about Dragon's Dogma. Dragon's Dogma is a 2012 action role-playing game developed by Capcom. The best way I can describe it is that it feels like a Demon/Dark Souls game, but not as punishing. First things first, character creation time. Okay, that's close enough. The game opens up with a character called Savan. He leads a small party to face a massive red dragon. We then see another red dragon being awakened among a flock of harpies. Cut to the present. The beautiful main character is in a coastal village, when suddenly, this idyllic, peaceful village is attacked by that same dragon from before. The beautiful main character sees that the royal guards have run off and decides to defend her home like the bad bitch that she is, even though she knows there's a chance that she might die. Somehow, she manages to strike the dragon, but then he rips out her heart and utters words in a mysterious language. Somehow, the beautiful main character survives and now has a glowing scar and hears the voice of the dragon called Grigori. She is now the new Arisen. The premise is really simple. Obviously, we need to stop this dragon and claim our heart back. We are literally being called to arms by him, but it's not about the destination. It's the journey. A journey that is filled with many interesting minor and major quests that reveal a lot about the lore and mythos of this decaying country known as Granzes, that is plagued with all manner of beasts. We have to stop a witch hunt being carried out by scared townsfolk who are scapegoating a woman living in the deep forest. We have to investigate a mysterious death cult that worships the dragon. And we have to save the Duchess from her husband, the Duke, the ruler of the land, a former Arisen, and an abusive madman. As we go along in our journey, we learn more about the dragon Grigori and the nature of an Arisen. There's a lot of solid world building that I love, like the lore is really fascinating to me. The story needs some work, some refinement to make it really strong. You can tell that the developers were taking inspiration from Western RPGs such as Fable and Elder Scrolls. Your character can make choices that impact the game. Some do and some don't. Like, that whole thing needs a little bit of work. But even with all those shortcomings, it more than makes up with it with the gameplay. The combat system is just sick. The enemies, for instance, you fight goblins, wolves, bandits. Okay, that's standard. But then there's a Hydra and a Cyclops, Harpies, Saurians, a Minotaur, Chimera, Ogres, Griffins, and you can climb them. You can climb the giant monsters. Like, this is a 12 Tribes of Hercules. Almost. But yes, the fight against Grigori is one of the best boss fights I've ever played in a game. Then there's the pawn system. You can create a companion that can follow you throughout the whole game. My pawn is very beautiful. His name is Kamal. He's tall, strong, and protects me. We make a fine team. If you end up hiring him, you should rate him 5 stars because he's wonderful. If my fangirling has convinced you to play this game, it's available on pretty much all platforms now. Okay, I'm about to spoil it. Last warning. Killing Grigori is not the end. Once the dragon is dead, the sky turns an ugly color, and the giant hole opens up in the middle of the capital city. When you fall in, you are sent to a higher plane where you meet the Seneschal, who is basically the god of this world. And the first time you play, it's Savan, the Arisen from the start of the game. He gives you a choice to go back and live your life or face him. If you do face him and lose, you become a dragon. And if you win, you become the Seneschal. This means that the Arisen, Dragon, and the Seneschal are all in servitude to this cosmic circle of life. It was a big twist and made me want to play the game. What New Game Plus am I? Yeah, New Game Plus 6. I and many others want a sequel game badly. We didn't get that. What came out next was Dragon's Dogma Online, which was exclusive to Japan. The game's director, Hideki Itsuna, said he had to choose between Dragon's Dogma 2 and Devil May Cry 5, and he chose the latter. So those of us outside Japan had to accept the scraps of Dragon's Dogma content that we could get our hands on, which included the manga Dragon's Dogma Progress. The manga, with art by Hirano Hirotoshi, is a condensed version of the game's main story. The main character, Karol, is your typical shonen manga hero. Kind, strong, very brave, will be there for his friends. You know the type. All around nice boy who smiles but deep down wants revenge. Many of the NPCs from the game show up in the manga. There was Kina, Chief Adaro, Mercedes, and others. It did some new things with how the pawns work in the game to better suit this new medium. So when pawns die in the game, they return to the rift, and going to a rift stone, you can get them back or get a newer and stronger pawn to replace them. Now, in the manga, a pawn called Stan is killed and Karol goes to a rift stone to revive him. Then Stan acts like this is the first time meeting him. Even though he has spent months with Karol and the other pawns building a relationship, the 4 of them all fighting side by side, Stan dying erased all of that. All that progress is gone. Oh, I just got the title now. Yeah, okay. This motivates Karol to get better and fight harder so that none of his pawns die, because he doesn't want those memories to die too, because the time they spent together is precious to him. Even though pawns are described as hollow vessels devoid of emotion that follow the Arisen's order, akin to myrmidons, Karol doesn't see them as such. He considers them as his companions, his friends, and their loss affects him. I really like this addition. In the game, the longer the main pawn is by an Arisen's side, the more human they become. The pawn starts to share the Arisen's soul almost, and when the Arisen dies, the pawn becomes human, in a process called the bestowal of spirit. You kind of get a sense of that happening within the manga. I enjoyed the manga. It was basically the game told with a touch more characterization. The changes that they made, some were good and some were really bad, but overall, I was fine with it. So when the Dragon's Dogma anime was announced for Netflix, I, like many people in the fandom, was happy to be getting something and hoping that this could all lead to Dragon's Dogma 2. Then I read the synopsis, and then I saw the trailer, and then I became apprehensive. It sounded like bog standard generic fantasy. I mean, as someone who has read and watched a lot of fantasy, I know the tropes well. A strong loner hunts down the beast that killed his family, and now he's out for revenge, but the road to vengeance can be bad and filled with blah blah blah. I've seen this before, you've seen this before, but you know, I was still willing to give it a chance. I have seen bog standard generic fantasy plots be executed in interesting ways before. So when it was released on Netflix last year, I gave it a chance. So, okay. This isn't going to be a detailed episode by episode review. Mother's Basement and plenty other people have done that already, and I feel that most people have watched those last year. It's not going to be very nitpicky either, so I won't be pointing out minor world building details that they got wrong, like the religion of the land. I've done enough of that last year with the fans. So I'm just going to talk about points where the adaptation fell flat for me. As always, let's be nice first. I like it when different animation styles are combined. When 2D and 3D are put together in a skillful way, it can look really good. I'm not sold on this anime's 3D style completely, but it did look better than Berserk. They used it pretty nicely in the fight scenes. The monsters look like the game monsters, not as detailed, but that's fine. The animation studio, Sublimation, have worked alongside other studios on a bunch of different anime. They do a lot of the 3D CGI parts for them. Before Dragon's Dogma, the only other anime they produced was an OVA called Walking Meat. And the style and how it moves looks very similar to Dragon's Dogma. The stuff coming from Sublimation in 2021 looks better though, so good for them. Magic Archer is one of my favourite vocations, so it was cool that a character was a magic archer. And it was nice to see that they brought back Tadayoshi Makino, the game's composer, to compose music for the anime too. Now for the not so nice. Okay. I really didn't like this. Honestly, I didn't expect that much after watching the trailer than seeing those episode titles based on the 7 deadly sins, because that was never a thing. I mean, Dogma, I get it, sins, godly shit, but yeah, I didn't like it. Each episode features one of the monsters from the game that represents a deadly sin. The main character Ethan and his pawn Hannah travel through the country to track down the dragon and help people along the way, only to find out by the end of the episode that humans are stupid little beings who may not be worth saving. The main character Ethan,
a dedicated young man with no characteristics.
Such a boring, stoic man with no character development until the very end, I suppose. I don't know why they added this weird berserk mode that he goes into. Okay, it just wasn't developed. You see, the problem with these blank audience surrogate characters is that after a while, they get really boring. You can get away with this in a game where you customize an avatar because we, the player, are supposed to project ourselves to the avatar. Hannah is exactly the same way, but even more boring because she's a pawn. No character, no personality, but being a pawn gives her an excuse at least. And that's where the problem lies. If one of your main characters has to be a blank and empty slate, the other main character needs to be super compelling to make up for that. But no, we are stuck with the cardboard couple for 7 episodes. If we could see more of Ethan dealing with the grief of losing his family, that would have been something. Vengeance can be his motivation, and he can be completely one goal orientated. But the man needs some depth. Let's say he was told that if he died without a heart, he could never be reunited with his family in the afterlife. So that gives him another reason to seek out the dragon. And then at the end, when he becomes the new dragon by eating the heart of the last one, for some reason, it's tragic and sad because after everything he endured, he still can't be with them. Because the doll duo are traveling around, we only meet one of characters, and side characters were sorely needed. We do meet these two, the only interesting people in the entire show, Balthazar and Simon, who are boyfriends. You can't change my mind about this. We meet them in episode 3 entitled Envy, and good God was I envious because I wanted to follow them to see what they were getting up to. When the episode ended and they parted ways, I was like, no, take me with you. We see them again in episode 5 entitled Greed, where cursed gold makes one of them kill each other, so there goes my faves. But going back to episode 3, content warning for sexual assault. If you like, you can skip to this time here. This episode was disgusting. Alright, so the monster of the day is a griffin and a horde of goblins. The goblins are attacking this caravan, and the knightly boyfriends are fighting against them. They're also protecting a wealthy, scared man who can't fight, and his wife who can't fight either. They are overpowered by the goblins, then the wife is then sexually assaulted by the goblins. They tear her clothes and her breasts are exposed. She's writhing in terror for quite some time. It's actually gratuitous. Ethan and Hannah then swoop in time to save everyone. Wifey is smitten with Ethan because he is such a big, strong man, and basically she pops out her tits and tries to seduce him and cheat right in front of her husband. So I know that fan service or perv pandering would be a thing. I expected it. The game had some very light fan servicey types of moments, and it mostly came from this one character, Madeline. The manga even had some too, playing up the main character Elise, but it was pretty tame in comparison, There was no threat of sexual assault. So I expected the same level with the manga to be with the anime, And we did get some of that. There were characters who were just there having sex. But did we need that moment? No! And the only reason why we got it was because Goblin Slayer is a thing. And that features goblins violating women. I've never watched that show and I was happy ignoring its existence, but this happened. Thank you, Dragon's Dogma Anime, for reminding me of it. If there is one thing I would like to stop seeing, in fantasy especially, is that when someone has just been rescued from sexual assault, they don't try to reward their rescuer with sex seconds later. Because somehow, I don't think most people will be in the mood. Yet this happens a lot. This whole episode felt like a missing scene from Game of Thrones. Tits and dragons while failing at their attempt to be deep and profound. The way how this episode ends was stupid too. Remember, this episode is entitled Envy, so the envious husband kills his wife, freaks out about it, then kills himself. The only good thing was the griffin and the boyfriends. So pale. So damn pale. I think the darkest person in this cast is Olivia. Oh, Olivia is Ethan's wife. Her design is based off of Kina in the game, and Kina is one of the lighter skinned people of the village, so that's saying something. The video game is not that pale. The NPCs were of all colours. The game has a very Greco-Roman, medieval, Western Europe look to it, and contrary to popular belief, wasn't all white, especially in the Mediterranean areas. Cosadis, the small coastal village, looks very Greek. A lot of the residents there have brown skin and have a Spanish-sounding name and speak with some type of Southern European accent. Grand Soren, the capital city, has people of all colours and many different accents. The manga did a better job at this. They included many of the darker skinned characters from the game and even created some. Look at this guy. His name is Robert and he's handsome. They did the dragon Grigori so wrong. He speaks weird. He uses thee, thine and thou. Apparently, this was the same English voice actor from the game, David Lodge, but I couldn't tell because they put his voice through a filter to make it somehow more demonic and slow. In the game, Grigori had a great voice and spoke with this menacing sophistication. Let's just compare the two.
This is all for my amusement. Is that what thou truly thinks arisen? Dost thou hate me? Then defeat me. Fulfill your revenge.
The rantings of an up-jump zealot make for tedious listening. His ilk serves no role in what is to come. Only my death will staunch the flood of destruction. A task still far beyond your means. If you would face me, seek me out, and I shall allow it. But heed the zealot's lesson well. When the weak court death, they find it.
How it ended had me looking at my TV asking, what was the reason? The dragon's whole existence was to cause chaos because that's what dragons do, I guess. After Ethan fought against the monsters representing sin, he became the dragon because those who fight monsters should do well not to become them. This was all just pointless and wasn't as deep as they thought it was.
When thou peers into the dark peers into thee.
And that Nietzsche quote, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. That theme is basically in the game too, but it involved the seneschal and made sense with the cycle of the three beings. The anime omitted the cycle and did not even allude to it like how they did in the manga. So everything is just hollow and pointless. If the destination was all for naught, then the journey ought to have been compelling, right? Oh my days. Somehow, this show did the most and the least at the same time. I used to think the reason why so many of these adaptations were bad because they weren't animated. There were some children's TV shows based on video games that I thought were good and many that were not. I know we all love Pokemon, but that first movie was, the sequels are better. The very first video game adaptation ever was a straight-to-VHS anime of Super Mario Bros., released back in 1986. It's not good, but it's better than whatever that live-action movie tried to do. And if a Legend of Zelda movie ever does happen, I think a lot of us would prefer it to be animated.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Not you. Anyways, I stopped thinking that the problem was the lack of animation after rewatching some old faves, looking at a bunch of 80s and early 90s cartoons I only ever heard about, and then being reminded of Final Fantasy Unlimited. Then of course, there's the very beautiful, but very bad Final Fantasy Spirits Within.
Maybe I could sneak in and watch Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I don't care what anybody says, that's one of the best sci-fi films ever made.
Max, is Square Enix forcing you to say this? Dragon's Dogma was another example that animation can't fix everything, unfortunately. Back when it was first announced for Netflix, a lot of us had high hope. We looked at Castlevania as an example of things to come. Because that was so good. A show that managed to find the right balance of incorporating the lore and story of the games while adding their own fresh spin on it. They didn't try to retell the story of the game as if it was a let's play or a walkthrough. Watching Dragon's Dogma felt like watching a speedrun version of the game. So how can we learn from Dragon's Dogma and Castlevania and turn the interactive experience into a passive one? In games that have a lot of history and lore that is quite vague, there's a lot of areas to mine for an interesting story. Dragon's Dogma could have been about the origin story of one of the many Arisens you meet in the game. Savad would have been the obvious choice. He has the most detailed backstory shown in the prequel novel and motion comic. He's in all the promotional art for Dragon's Dogma. His look is also the default for the Arisen, so characters that are not him basically look like him. But to me, the best choice would be Duke Edmund's Dragonsbane. His story is equal parts tragic and vague, so the writers can do whatever they want with it. His story doesn't involve the Seneschal either, so there's no need to worry about the post-Dragon spoilers. So Edmund's story goes like this. He was an unimportant soldier and then the dragon appeared and mocked him as Arisen. When an Arisen confronts a dragon, the dragon will offer them a choice. Face them in battle to win back their heart, or sacrifice your beloved to them in exchange for power, i.e. becoming the ruler of the land. Edmund took the dragon's deal and gave up his beloved Lenore, and became Duke. This choice has tormented him. It nearly drove him to murder his current wife, Eleanor. I can picture the final scene of the episode, where the Duke is sitting alone on his throne, and he just cries out for Lenore. This could really work. If you have a character that fans of the game are familiar with, getting to see his backstory and picking up on certain Easter eggs, you also won't alienate newcomers because this is a whole new story that still contains all the basic framework of the game. Comic books and novel tie-ins, and even the movie that nobody really liked, for Dragon Age all did this. And Telltale Games The Walking Dead did this in reverse, when translating the comic books into a game. An entirely new cast of characters with their own stories living within the world of the comics. And we had a few Easter eggs in 2 comic book characters showing up, but not taking away from the focus of the main characters of the game. If you never played Dragon's Dogma but enjoyed the anime, play the game, it's much better. And if you hated the anime, play the game, it's much better. And if you played the game and loved the anime, good for you. Silver lining, maybe this can be the reason we get a sequel sooner rather than later. Back in the 2000s, there were a bunch of poorly made, cheap, mostly straight to DVD video game adaptations that were just awful. No care and no love for the source material could be found in these movies, and it helped populate the idea that video game adaptations are impossible. We can blame a lot of that on the director, and I use that term very loosely, Uwe Bau movement, who took advantage of a loophole in German tax law that would ensure filmmakers see a 50% return on investment for their films. On the flip side of that, back then there were a slew of licensed video games based on movies that were shovelware. They were the children of E.T. for the Atari. These games were made to coincide with the release of their movies as part of cross-media promotion. These games were rushed and full of bugs and glitches. They were also quite cheap to purchase. I have a few of these games on the PS2 and GameCube. I happen to own the Catwoman game, which is terrible. But this was the only video game that I owned back then that had a black woman main character. There are a small handful of games that exist now that have a black girl lead, but back then it was a wasteland and I was starving, so I took them crumbs. Today, we have a bunch of licensed games that are much better. I mentioned Telltale Games earlier. Back in its heyday, film and TV studios were knocking down the door of Telltale Games to get that sweet, episodic video game magic. Storytelling in video games has improved over the years to the point where you can cut out most, if not all, of the gameplay and watch the cutscenes alone. All the storytelling and gameplay are completely entwined. It is no surprise that the video games that most resemble TV shows and movies are now being turned into TV shows and movies. I'm looking forward to see how well The Last of Us TV series does. So far, Detective Pikachu and Angry Birds 2 have been some of the few movies to have broken the curse, being well received by audience and critics alike, and of course making a lot of money. Although the phrase good for a video game movie is used when praising them. Adaptations for books and comics have had a head start. In comparison, video games are still new and no one has written a book or taught a class on how to adapt a video game successfully. Uwe Boll is gone, and the people in the writer's room and director's chair are fans of the properties that they are adapting, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. But it will take some time before the phrase good for a video game movie is replaced with good movie. So I'm curious, what video game adaptations do you lot like? TV, movies, comics, novels, whatever. I want to know. Also, do you think that Netflix interactive shows like Bandersnatch and Telltale Minecraft are the wave? Should more adaptations be like that, or is that its own separate experience that can be used to bridge the gap of passive and interactive media? And before anyone mentions The Witcher in the comments, I didn't bring that one up because that show is adapting the books, not the game. Okay? Okay. So this video was supposed to come out way before the Mortal Kombat movie did. I had a whole segment talking about it, but since my laptop decided to stop working, I had to cut it. Anyways, if anyone's interested, I started a Patreon. If you like to help me make more videos in a timely fashion, go there and help me buy more cheap instant coffee so I can be alert when I record these in the dead of the night. Thank you for watching. I'm still bad at outros. Good night.